Oh dear, fucking stupid fucking idiot. What was he thinking? Barry Butters does James Bond on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Honestly, mate, what were you thinking? You thought you could step into Sean Connery's shoes, didn't you? You thought it'd be easy. Well, it's not easy. Acting's difficult. You better leave it to the experts, mate. You stupid bastard. I don't know if I can carry on. Waste of bloody time. Honestly, I don't know what to do with you. Dear oh dear. What the bloody hell's going on? What's all that blue stuff? Oh! Hello! It's Mr. Tanner.
What's wrong, Barry? You look real sad.
Yeah, I'm having a bit of an issue with this review, mate. I don't really think I can be bothered.
Oh, Barry! You've got to carry on.
I don't know. Maybe.
Come on, Barry. I believe in you.
Well, thanks for the encouragement. I guess you're right. I could start by, I don't know.
I know it's a struggle, but I'm sure if you try hard, you can think of something interesting to say.
Alright, mate. You've won me over. Let's get down to business. Begins with a range of locations in Portugal this time. You got this fancy hotel. Then you got a ball ring. Then you got a shopping centre. Then you got a beach. Then you got these private gardens. Then you got a variety of locations in England as well. And here you can see St Paul's in London and a College of Arms. And this is the first time we see M's house. It's a Regency manor house on the edge of Windsor Forest, but a majority of the film takes place in Switzerland. And this is Blofeld's private lair. But in a break from the trend that started in From Russia with Love, you ain't got any gadgets in this film. But Bond still has his trusty Walter PPK, and they put George Lazenby in some very similar suits to Sean Connery. You got this grey one. Then you got this classic blue suit. And then you got the old DJ as well. But in a bit of a break from the formula, George Lazenby's got this frilly shirt under his DJ. It looks a bit silly, especially when he's lying down. In my opinion, this makes him look like a bit of an aristocrat or a prince. But then you've got more classic suits like this one, and a pinstripe. But then there seems to be another wardrobe mishap at the ball ring, where Bond turns up in this tweed suit and a yellow cravat. Again, I think this looks a bit aristocratic too, and not very true to the Bond character. But then at the end of the film, he's wearing a very nice three-piece wedding suit. But for quite a large portion of the film, Bond is in disguise. So he's got these tortoiseshell glasses, a tweed trilby hat, and this thing called an Inverness cape. He's meant to be an academic, but for some reason he looks a bit like Sherlock Holmes. Then after he gets inside and takes his cape off, he's wearing this tweed suit and a checkered shirt. And he also walks around smoking a pipe. But then his disguise gets even more elaborate when he opens his suitcase and pulls out this kilt. And then he spends quite a lot of time in this Scottish regalia. By the way, if you're wondering, this little bag what's covering his nuts is called a sporran. And this frilly little thing around his neck is called a lace jabot. Now this might just be me, but in general I reckon lace makes men look weak and stupid, while it makes women look, well, rather nice indeed. And in terms of women, we got an whole bunch of them this time. But then you've got the main Bond girl, Tracy, played by Diana Rigg. And as we've seen before, you've got James Bond as a symbol of good and Blofeld as a symbol of evil. But just by looking at the iconography in isolation, I think we can see there's something a bit off this time. I think the first sign of this is seen with the frilly shirt. To be fair, we did see Sean Connery wearing a silly outfit once in Goldfinger, but that's only once in 5 films, whereas George Lazenby dresses up in a number of silly outfits in just a single film. It makes it very hard to take Bond seriously, because he looks like a bit of a twit. I know it's a disguise, but surely they didn't have to go so over the top. And making matters worse, he also puts on a silly voice, which seems sort of unnecessary and clownish.
Sir Hilary Grey, Baronet.
The same, dear lady.
I'm Fräulein Irma Bunt, personal secretary to the Count.
How'd you do?
Have you had a good journey?
No, quite intolerable. I'm not a good traveller, I'm afraid.
This is the first film where Bond is in disguise for any length of time, and it's strange that this should have happened in a film where the audience is also being asked to get used to a new actor playing Bond. Of course, we did see Bond in disguise in You Only Live Twice as well, where he became a Japanese fisherman, but in this film it goes on for much longer. But despite all this, On Her Maj does contain most of the things that the earlier Bond films did. You've got more or less the same list of supporting characters, and you've also got the same set pieces. So let's start with the supporting characters. The scene between Bond and Moneypenny is similar to the scenes we've seen before, although if you pay attention, the flirtatious element of their relationship is quite exaggerated this time around.
James, where have you been?
Much too far from you, darling.
Same old James. Oh, only more so.
I think the scene between Bond and M is quite different, because Lazenby don't show the same sort of deference to authority that Sean Connery did. He tends to play Bond as a bit more of a maverick.
I'm relieving you from Operation Bedlam, 007.
But, sir, Blofeld's something of a must with me.
You've had 2 years to run him down.
Does this mean you've lost confidence in me?
I'm well aware of your challenge, 007. The license to kill is useless unless one can set up the target. I'll find you a more suitable assignment, that's all.
Sir, under the
That's all.
And the scene between Bond and Q is a bit different too. Unusually it takes place at the end, and on this occasion Q is quite pleased that Bond has started to mature a bit more.
Congratulations, 007. I must confess that I've sometimes thought you a little,
Irresponsible?
Exactly, that's exactly the word. Thank you. This time, my boy, I can't complain.
On Her Maj is also a bit unusual in terms of James Bond's ally, because as we've seen with the previous films, this is normally Felix Leiter or some Felix Leiter equivalent. But in this film, Bond's ally is actually this bloke called Draco, who's the head of a criminal organisation known as the Union Course.
Do not kill me, Mr. Bond. At least not until we've had a drink. Then if you wish, I'll give you another chance. I'm Draco, of Draco Construction.
There is in fact another spy in the film who tries to help Bond in Switzerland as part of his plan to take out Blofeld. But the thing is, they never actually meet, and this spy is quickly killed off. So he's a very, very minor character.
Oh, poor fellow. He was restless too. You perverse British, how you love your exercise. Every year, dozens of amateur climbers. They wind up in the same predicament. A kind of waxwork show for morbid tourists.
And then you've got the Bond girl, Tracy.
Why do you persist in rescuing me, Mr. Bond?
It's becoming a habit, isn't it, Contessa Teresa?
Teresa was a saint. I'm known as Tracy.
And this film has all the same sort of set pieces. You got some pretty decent fist fights. You got your old car chases. And this film introduced something that a lot of people associate with the Bond franchise. A nice little ski chase. And you've also got a nice little daring escape. And you've also got a fair number of explosions. And I think I'm right in saying that we've got more sex scenes in this film than we've ever had before.
I think you're in some sort of trouble.
Would you like to talk about it?
No, Mr. Bond. The only thing you need know about me is that I pay my debts.
20,000 francs is a lot of money.
Well, at least someone's enjoying themselves. I had to take you out the screen to give you a proper good talking to, didn't I? But I guess we got to be constructive. We got to try and figure out how it all went wrong. I guess we can move on to the story structure. I think that'll give us a few clues. On Her Majesty's Secret Service begins with quite an unusual pre-credit sequence. It's unusual because it begins with M and Q in conversation. M tells Q that he can't find Bond anywhere. Then he asks Moneypenny over the intercom if there's been any update. But she confirms that he's still missing. We then cut to Portugal when we get an exterior shot of his car. We then see inside of the car, but the face of the driver is concealed. This mysterious driver is then overtaken by a red sports car, and he gives chase. He follows the female driver to a beach and looks to see what she's up to through the lens of his sniper rifle. But he then runs after her once he realises she's trying to commit suicide. He takes her in his arms and brings her back to the shore. She quickly wakes up and this mysterious stranger introduces himself.
Good morning. My name's Bond. James Bond.
Now this could just be me, but this seems like a very clumsy way of introducing the audience to a new Bond, because the introduction takes place immediately after a suicide attempt. And it's also made worse because George Lazenby's got this cheesy, self-satisfied grin at the same time. So it comes across as insensitive and weird and egotistical. Just imagine some similar examples. Imagine your girlfriend tells you she's got a cancer diagnosis, and then you immediately tell her you're happy because you bought a new car. Or imagine your best friend tells you that their dog just got run over, and you say, don't worry about that, I just got a really good workout at the gym. But anyway, let's get back to the plot summary, because at this point the camera pulls back to show that all is not as it seems. You can see that someone's got a gun pointed to the back of James Bond's head. But just when you might be hoping that this bloke's going to pull the trigger, a fight breaks out and James Bond gets the better of both of them. But then he looks a bit puzzled because the girl just drives off. And then he says this before looking directly into the camera.
This never happened to the other fella.
So in my opinion, they completely fluffed the way the new Bond is introduced. It's pretty terrible. And it's another indication, like the frilly shirt, that things are about to go off the rails this time. As George Lazenby gazes into the camera, we then cut to the credits. After the credits, Bond is still in Portugal, and he helps out the same woman again when she can't pay her gambling debts at the casino. Sorry about this, I'm a bit of a slow typer. But shortly after that, Bond is then ambushed for a second time, and then he has a one-night stand with Tracy. But then the next morning, Bond is ambushed for a third time, and he's taken to meet Draco, the head of the Union Course. Draco reveals that he's Tracy's father, and he offers Bond 1 million squid to marry his daughter. Bond refuses this offer, but he does agree to carry on seeing Tracy. But in exchange for this favour, he asks Draco for the whereabouts of Blofeld. So here you can see the hotel, and this is where Bond goes inside and he checks in. And he's shown to his room. Got a nice little bed out on the balcony. The hotel's also got this casino in it. And Bond goes and plays cards. But then the girl who tried to drown herself turns up. And she places a bet. But she folds her cards after she loses. Then she explains that she can't pay her debt. But then Bond gallantly offers to pay her debt. The girl then introduces herself as Tracy and also tells Bond her room number. Then Bond goes to her hotel room, but she's not there. And then he's ambushed by this bloke, and they get into a fight, and James Bond knocks him out cold. Then he goes back to his own room, but then Tracy's in his room, and she pulls a gun on him. But Bond easily disarms her. He then interrogates her, but she said she didn't have nothing to do with the ambushing. She then goes to lie down, and things get a bit sexy. Then in the morning, Bond is ambushed for a third time. And these blokes take him to see their boss, and that's Draco. And Draco offers Bond £1 million if he'll marry his daughter. Bond refuses, but says he'll carry on seeing Tracy, and he also asks Draco for a favour, the whereabouts of Blofeld. Act 2 opens with Bond back in London, and M takes him off Operation Bedlam. At this point Bond is annoyed and he almost resigns, but Moneypenny saves the day with a nice little trick. After all that, we go back to Portugal again, and Bond and Tracy continue their courtship, and they fall in love. I need to go to the supermarket later on. Buy some custard creams. But then Bond gets a lead from Draco. He tells him that Blofeld is in the process of claiming a family name from the College of Arms. I think I'll pick up a couple of frozen pizzas. Bond then travels to the Swiss Alps to meet Blofeld, and he disguises himself as an herald from the college. I'll pick up some washing up liquid too. Then things take a bit of a strange turn when Bond meets 12 women at Blofeld's retreat. They say that they're being treated for various allergies. So this is the scene when M tells Bond that he's no longer working on Operation Bedlam. But then Bond is really pissed off about that. But M tells Bond that his decision is final. Bond then dictates his resignation letter to Moneypenny. And M apparently accepts his resignation. But then good old Moneypenny reveals that she secretly changed the letter. She changed it to a request for 2 weeks' leave. Bond then goes back to Portugal where he romances Tracy. But while he's on holiday, Bond also follows up on the lead that is given to him by Draco. He breaks into the lawyer's office who works for Blofeld. And with the help of this giant safecracker, he finds some documents. This shows Blofeld's correspondence with the College of Arms in London. Bond then goes back to London and he visits M in his fancy house. Bond tells M about the new information he's gathered on Blofeld and he requests to be reassigned to Operation Bedlam. Bond then visits the College of Arms and he has a bit of a chinwag about heraldry with this bloke called Hilary Bray. Hilary's the bloke that's been in correspondence with Blofeld's lawyer about the family title. Hilary Bray also gives his consent for Bond to impersonate him. And at this point, Bond finally travels to Switzerland to meet Blofeld. Bond arrives in Switzerland by train, and he's met at the station by Irma Bunt, who's Blofeld's personal secretary. She then takes Bond to Blofeld's secret base, high up in the Alps, by helicopter. But Bond don't meet Blofeld straight away, instead he meets these 12 beautiful ladies, and Bond learns that these young ladies are all being treated for various allergies. It don't take too long before Blofeld realises Bond's true identity. At this point, Blofeld also reveals to Bond what his true plans are. The girls only think they're being treated for their allergies. In fact, they're going to be used to distribute bacteriological weapons. But then after all that, Bond escapes on skis, and he arrives in this town, and this is where Bond reunites with Tracy. But then before long, Blofeld catches up to both of them. Tracy is captured, but Bond escapes. In the next scene, Bond is back in London, and he's with M again, and M tells Bond that they've agreed to Blofeld's ransom demands. But this is the first time in the films where Bond disobeys a direct order. He turns to his friend Draco, and with the help of Draco they destroy Blofeld's base. First of all, Blofeld is taken in by Bond's disguise, and they seem to be getting on pretty well, but Blofeld is not so easily fooled. He figures out what's going on when Bond makes a mistake with heraldry.
Merry Christmas, 007.
I'm Sir Hilary Bray.
Oh, no, Mr. Bond. Respectable baronets from the College of Heralds do not seduce female patients in clinics. On the other hand, they do get their professional details right. The Beauchamp tombs are not in the Augsburg Cathedral, as you said, but in the St. Anna Kirche. Sir Hilary Bray would have known. A small slip.
And then Blofeld sits down and shares his plan with Bond to use the girls to spread bacteriological agents around the world. Then Blofeld locks him up, but Bond, in time-honoured fashion, makes a daring escape, and he goes off down a mountain. Then Blofeld learns about his escape, and a few of his henchmen go in pursuit of Bond. But Bond manages to get the better of them, and he eventually escapes to this town. But in the middle of all this, he's reunited with Tracy. And then Bond escapes in her car. But Blofeld's men are still in pursuit. But she's a pretty bloody good driver and she gives them the slip. After that, there's a blizzard. And Bond and Tracy take cover in a barn. But then things get really romantic, and Bond proposes marriage. But then the next morning, Blofeld and his men have caught up to them. But they've already escaped, you see. And Bond and Tracy ski off together, with Blofeld's men in pursuit. But then Blofeld has a clever idea of deliberately causing an avalanche by setting off this flare. And they recover Tracy, but they don't see Bond, so he's able to escape. We then see Bond back in London with M. And M tells Bond that they've given in to Blofeld's ransom demands. Bond then calls in a favour from Draco, and they assault Blofeld's base by helicopter. Then they land and carry on the assault on foot. Bond and Tracy are reunited. Then Draco's men plant explosives. At this point, Blofeld makes a run for it. And then we get a chase sequence. Blofeld escapes in a bobsleigh, But Bond carries on his pursuit. Eventually Bond catches up to Blofeld and they have a fight on the bobsleigh. But it ends when Blofeld gets his head stuck in a tree branch. Then you got a very dark epilogue to this film. This occurs after Bond and Tracy marry in Portugal. Bond pulls into the side of the road to remove the wedding flowers from his car, but then Blofeld and Bunt commit a drive-by shooting. My back's killing me. Bond survives, but Tracy is killed. Come on, Barry, sit up straight. That's it. Need some ibuprofen. So here you can see Bond and Tracy getting married, and they cut the cake, and MQ and Moneypenny are in attendance. Then they drive off in their car and everyone throws confetti. After they drive for a bit, Bond gets out to take the flowers off their car. But then we see Blofeld, and he's got Irma Bunt in the back with a machine gun. They whiz past and she starts firing. Bond is alright, but Tracy is shot through the windshield. And for the first time in a Bond film, we end on a negative note. Oh, George. Fucking hell.
Katharina von Schell from Hungary. Silvana Henriquez from Jamaica. Helena Ronne from Israel. Mona Tong from Singapore. Zara from Kashmir. Jenny Hanley, London, England. Julie Ege, Norge.
My name is Yuri Boryenko. I born in Minsk.
You got more Bond girls in this film than we've ever seen before, but I'd have to say it all feels a lot less sexy this time around. For example, you got this dinner scene where a lot of the Bond girls are gorging on this massive meal. They're stuffing their faces with chicken and potato.
Delicious. I used to hate chicken. It used to make me break out, but all over. You'd be surprised where.
Potatoes did it to me. Now I adore them.
No medical histories, please.
Just contrast this with the famous scene from Dr. No, where Ursula Andress comes out of the sea in that bikini, looking all ravishing and spectacular. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with girls enjoying roast chicken, but it's not necessarily very sexy. Anyway, the main Bond girl is Tracy, and she's played by Diana Rigg. Now, Diana Rigg was a very big deal in the 60s. She rose to fame off the back of this TV show called The Avengers, which was also about spies. So that made her an obvious choice to play the female lead in a James Bond film. And it's not just about sex this time around. In this film, James Bond falls in love, and things get all soppy and romantic. On occasion, this theme in the film is quite well handled. In the barn scene, for example.
Tracy, an agent shouldn't be concerned with anything but himself.
I understand. We just have to go on the way we are.
We'll have to find something else to do.
Are you sure, James?
I love you. I'll never find another girl like you. Will you marry me?
But then there are other times where it's very cheesy.
I was always taught that mistakes should be remedied, especially between friends. Or lovers.
We have all the time in the world. Time enough for life to unfold all the precious things love has in store. We have all the love in the world.
The thing is, this romantic theme is such a departure from the previous films, so it was always going to be hard to make it work. But this also happens in the same film where you're trying to get used to a new James Bond. So the combination of these two things is a bit too much. Now I guess Diana Rigg is pretty good, but the thing is, I don't really like the way she's written in the film, because I think they misunderstand something crucial about the way her character works in a novel. And this is in relation to the theme of snobbery. In order to understand what I mean by this, you only need to look at a scene where Tracy introduces herself.
Why do you persist in rescuing me, Mr. Bond?
It's becoming a habit, isn't it, Contessa Teresa?
Teresa was a saint. I'm known as Tracy.
Here she explains that she prefers the name Tracy to her given name of Teresa because she's not a good person. But the thing is, in the novel she has a completely different justification for preferring Tracy. So if you look at chapter 2 in the novel, and this is page 11, Bond goes, "By the way, Monsieur Maurice, who is the lady who has just driven up in the white Lancia? She is staying here?" "Yes indeed, mon commandant." Bond received an extra 2 teeth in the enthusiastic smile. "The lady is a good friend of the house. The father is a very big industrialist from the south. She is La Comtesse Teresa di Vincenzo. Monsieur must surely have read of her in the papers. Madame La Comtesse is a lady, how shall I put it?" The smile became secret. Between men. A lady, shall we say, who lives life to the full. And then a bit further on, after this information, it goes, "Bond was faintly disappointed. She sounded a bit grand for him, and he didn't happen to like girls, film stars for instance, who were in any way public property." But then when they get to know each other, Bond realises she's not like this at all. In fact, when Bond is talking to her father later on in the novel, and this is chapter 5, on page 29, Draco explains she likes to call herself Tracy. She thinks Teresa sounds too grand. In the novel, this is partly what makes Tracy a likeable character. She don't take her noble birth very seriously. But in a film, this likeable dimension to her character don't come across. In fact, she acts like a real snob a lot of the time.
May I introduce my daughter, Teresa?
Contessa,
Mr. Bond and I have already met.
but each time is a renewed pleasure. Madame always makes one feel so welcome.
Now it's hard to know sometimes whether this is the character or the actress herself, because the thing is, Diana Rigg comes across a bit like this herself. You can see this from the interviews.
This was a mammoth production, an epic, and I've never done an epic before, and I rather wanted to know what it was like to be in an epic, whether I'd be a sort of a victim of the machinery or whether I'd be able to emerge as myself. I don't know. It was a challenge to me, and that's why I did it.
In addition to the different treatment of snobbery, there's also another issue about Tracy. In the film, for example, Draco, Tracy's father, explains why she's such a troubled soul, and this is also very different from the novel.
She joined the fast international set. One scandal after another. When I disapproved, cut off her allowance, she committed some greater folly to spite me.
The reason Fleming gives in the novel for Tracy's emotional instability has to do with a mixture of bloods. Now this is a very strange and old-fashioned idea, but it does make sense in the context of the novel. Tracy's got a Corsican father but an English mother, and according to Fleming's view of the world, this is a dangerous mixture. Draco explains on page 26, the mother's side of her blood was making her hate herself, despise herself more and more, and as I now see it, the worm of self-destruction had somehow got a hold inside her, and behind the wild, playful facade was eating away what I can only describe as her soul. Now, I can understand why they didn't include this in the film, but the idea they go with in the film makes Tracy even more unappealing. Because in the film, Draco explains that the reason for her emotional instability has to do with the fact that she's a spoilt rich kid, which again don't make her very endearing to the audience. The tone of this film can be described with a 4-letter word, and it's not what you're thinking. The word in question is camp. Now if you don't know what I mean by camp, you just have to take a brief look at the Carry On films.
And fling and in, and fling and in, and fling Oh, matron, take them away.
If you were a gentleman, you'd close your eyes.
In this sense, On Her Madge is the first Bond film since Dr. No to have problems with tone. There's not just 1 or 2 camp elements to the film, there's a lot of them. There is, for example, the kilt drop,
It's true!
the lipstick that is written on James Bond's thigh, the sexual innuendo around the word stiffness,
Is anything the matter, Sir Hilary?
Just a slight stiffness coming on.
Sir Hilary!
Good morning. Good morning, Sir Hilary. Your stiffness of last night, it is all gone?
the moneypenny arse grab, and the comical exaggeration of clumsiness, the bedding of multiple girls,
That lipstick was an inspiration.
So are you.
Oh, Sir Hilary.
Call me Hilly.
Hilly.
I don't even know your name.
I tell you all about myself later. In the morning.
Won't that be frightfully energetic?
No. We will show you.
Perhaps you'd like to teach me.
I must see you tonight.
9 o'clock? 10. Well, back to work. You've no idea how it's piling up. Hilly's so sad that Ruby's leaving. Has that old cow told you? Fancy meeting you, you crawler.
It's not New Year yet.
In fact, I'd say it seems so bad sometimes that it comes across as a Bond rip-off or a spoof. In fact, there were quite a lot of these made in the 1960s, and some of them are pretty funny.
You're a man.
Yes, Mr. Vine.
3 more minutes and this could have been very embarrassing for both of us. I knew you looked familiar. You're the strange little man from the hotel lobby, aren't you? Mr. Sheehy.
Right again.
It's very appropriate. Tell me, the female voice?
They train us well. Now it is time to die, Mr. Vine.
Another quite funny one is called Somebody's Stolen Our Russian Spy, but that came out quite a bit later, in 1976.
Thank you. Excuse me.
Oh, this watch is terribly slow. I'll just...
No! Get out! That was an ounce of nitroglycerin on a 10-second fuse. Perhaps that'll teach you not to play with other people's toys in future.
But actually, On Her Maj is even worse than this, because the camp tone exists in a movie that is also attempting to go deeper into character, while conveying a real love story, and a love story that ends in a tragic death.
It's Blofeld. Blofeld.
So it's like the filmmakers couldn't really make up their mind. The novel is much more consistent in this regard, because it just has a serious romance theme. For example, in the novel, Bond don't sleep with all the girls in the clinic.
Is anything the matter, Sir Henry?
Just a slight stiffness coming on.
Your stiffness of last night, it is all gone?
Fancy meeting you, Fraulein.
Oh, God, blimey.
In addition to all of this, I do think there's a problem that needs to be singled out above all others, and I call this problem in fact, this is such a big problem, it's hard to know where to start. It's a bit like trying to figure out how to clear up after a natural disaster. But I think I'll start by saying that he don't even know how to walk. I don't mean that literally, of course. I mean he can't walk like James Bond. And I call this problem the Lazenby strut.
Excuse me, sir. Commander Bond to see you.
Right, Chairman.
Aye, aye, sir. If you please, sir. Thank you.
Now, I don't want to come across as a racialist, but I reckon some of this has something to do with the fact that George Lazenby is Australian. This point is in fact made in one of the documentaries about the film, and the filmmakers actually wanted him to tone this down a bit, but it don't seem like it actually worked because it's still in the film.
My walk was such that Peter would pull me up. He said, "Stop that Australian swagger."
Although on one occasion he does walk around like he's got a sore knob. But then again, I suppose that's not all that surprising given the amount of sex he has in this film. But let's just remind ourselves how Sean Connery done it.
Good evening, sir. Happens to be 3 a.m. When do you sleep, 007?
Never on the film's time, sir.
Now I call this a complex walk. It's defined by its contradictions. It's graceful but masculine. It's confident yet cautious. And it also somehow reveals a deference to authority and a sense of a man who is bound by a sense of duty to Queen and country. I think you can also see from this that by comparing the two actors we get an insight into what's wrong with Lazenby's performance. So I'm going to compare 3 scenes from On Her Maj to Goldfinger, and these are all going to be similar sorts of scenes. So the first example is when things get a bit tense between Bond and M.
You've had 2 years to run him down.
Does this mean you've lost confidence in me?
I'm well aware of your challenge, 007. The license to kill is useless unless one can set up the target. I'll find you a more suitable assignment, that's all.
So under the circumstances...
That's all.
And then compare that to Goldfinger.
You've hardly distinguished yourself, have you? You were supposed to observe Mr. Goldfinger, not borrow his girlfriend. Instead of that, Goldfinger goes off to Europe, and it's only by the grace of God your friend Leiter and my intervention with the British Embassy in Washington that you're not in the custody of the Miami Beach police.
Sir, I'm aware of my shortcomings, but I'm prepared to continue this assignment in the spirit you suggest, if I knew what it was about.
The second example is the delivery of one-liners. So take this example from On Her Maj.
He had lots of guts!
And this example from Goldfinger.
Shocking.
The third and final example has to do with Bond as a cultured and sophisticated man who has a deep understanding of food and drink. So take this example from On Her Maj.
Royal Beluga, north of the Caspian.
And then compare this to a similar scene in Goldfinger.
I'd say it was a 30-year-old fiend indifferently blended, sir. With an overdose of Bombois.
Superficially, of course, Lazenby looks the part. He is, after all, a very handsome man. And he also, to his credit, does a very convincing English accent, despite the fact that he's Australian. But in the final analysis, Lazenby is so second-rate compared to Sean Connery. Connery is in a completely different league. And you can't help compare the two of them.
George, obviously there's going to be some comparison between yourself and Sean Connery. How do you think this comparison will affect your image?
I wasn't compared with Sean Connery before. And now it can only lead to better things, I hope.
In fact, journalists were still going on about this in the 1970s.
Did they hold Sean Connery above your head all the time?
A lot of the time. It was mentioned when he said, remember, you know, it's different scenes. He said, well, when you're there in front of this window, remember how in such and such a scene where Sean flicked his eyes up like that and he did this and that, which is all dramatic stuff, which Sean does as an actor, which he knows what he's doing when he does it, and it works for him. But it doesn't necessarily say it'll work for me.
There's also this separate problem that I don't really know how to name. So I'll just call it the problem. So why is Lazenby such a terrible actor? Well, it's pretty obvious actually. He was just a male model who advertised ice cream.
Now is the time for ice cream. Ice cream time! It's ice cream time with Lion's Mane. Ice cream time with Lion's Mane.
Alright, I'm only joking. He also advertised chocolate.
Here comes Big Fry with exotic Big Fry Turkish delights, full of Big Fry Eastern promise. Big Fry Turkish delights.
'Cause big fries are coming by. Big Fry.
Now, before you got this role, you were doing commercials for a chocolate manufacturer. How difficult was the transition?
What worries you most about taking on a multi-million-dollar movie like this?
Being able to do it well. That's what I'm hoping to be able to do. I just hope that my inexperience won't show.
But to be fair to Lazenby, I don't think all of these problems can be laid at his feet. Because there are problems with the characterisation of James Bond in this film that are not necessarily related to Lazenby's performance.
I was very uptight lots of the times because I didn't understand exactly what was going on. And the only person you could ask, the only person who knew what was going on was the director. And the director was very busy with his technical things, and he had control of 2 units and a whole lot of things, and he didn't really feel that an actor was important in the role. He felt that you could get any guy, I think he mentioned on BBC Radio, that you could get any guy, put him in that part and make him James Bond.
Because the other thing you gotta know is that this is also a new director, Peter Hunt. Now this bloke worked on the previous films as an editor and a second unit director, but after complaining to the producers, he was promoted to the role of director.
I said, I've finished with editing, I don't want to do any more editing, I'm going to direct.
So there are obviously going to be some things that George Lazenby's told to do by the director that he couldn't have helped. For example, in the opening scene you got Bond talking directly to the camera, which seems pretty goofy.
This never happened to the other fella.
But then later on he also talks to a portrait of the Queen, and that seems ridiculous too.
Sorry, ma'am.
But worst of all, he talks to himself in the mirror after he gets his leg over.
Hello, you old devil.
When Bond is taken to Blofeld's hideout by helicopter, he also pretends to be airsick, and he pulls this pathetic expression, and in my opinion this does further damage to Bond's image. Now you can excuse this because Bond is actually in disguise in this moment, but then there's a scene later on in the film where Bond is no longer in disguise and he has this expression of panic. Now to me this seems very out of character, because Bond is meant to be cool-headed at all times. This is how Sean Connery played the character, and this is well established in the minds of the audience. And I say this was another fault of the director, not really understanding the character of James Bond. There's also a scene in the film where Bond looks at a playboy. I suppose this fits because in some ways they're pushing the playboy's side to Bond himself, but they're doing this a bit too much, I'd say. The thing is, you can only go so far in this direction without Bond coming across as a complete tosser. And with Sean Connery's portrayal of Bond, there was always a saving grace of him taking his commitment to country and mission very seriously. And this underlying seriousness and sense of duty is absent from Lazenby's Bond. and he just comes across as a sort of shallow womaniser. I think the film's problems boil down to the fact that you've got a combination of a director who's out of his depth and a lead actor who's immature and inexperienced.
I look back at some of the interviews I did and some of the things I said, and I can see how much growing up I needed to do before I did that role.
The book of On Her Majesty's Secret Service was a great story, and it was a Fleming James Bond book. And so we didn't have to deviate. I didn't want to deviate. I didn't want to put gimmicks and tricks in it to make it. It didn't need making better. It was there. It was all there.
Now, we already saw in the discussion of the story structure how they mishandled the introduction of James Bond. But there's another point about how bad this is that you can only really understand by reading the novel. In this way we can establish why the adaptation is not only bad this time, but incompetent. The film starts with Bond running after Tracy and he rescues her from the sea. And this is an oddly casual or playful way of introducing himself after Tracy had just tried to kill herself.
Good morning. My name's Bond. James Bond.
The fact that he introduces himself also indicates to the audience that they haven't met before. But this is actually different from the novel. Thing is, in the novel we get a flashback to 2 weeks before these events, where it's shown that Bond actually meets Tracy for the first time at a casino, which then also provided a rationale for why Bond thought she was a suicide risk. And then about 20 minutes into the film, Tracy explains to Bond about her suicidal intentions. And then Bond is somehow surprised, even though he's already seen her suicide attempt.
Well, Tracy, next time play it safe and stand on 5.
People want to stay alive, play it safe.
Please stay alive.
Huh?
Now this is such an elementary mistake that it sort of boggles my mind. And it's a very strong and very early indication in the film that this is going to be a very poor adaptation. We have seen problems with the adaptations in the past with films like Dr. No and Thunderball, but nothing as bad as this, where logic completely goes out the fucking window. Oh, I don't know. I think I'm running out of steam.
You gotta continue, Barry. You really must.
Oh, I don't think I can.
Remember the prophecy.
The prophecy? What are you talking about?
Never mind that now. Forget I mentioned it. But you've committed to this task, so you must see it through to the end.
Yeah. I guess you're right, mate. The theme of snobbery in the novel is the glue that binds all the separate plot elements and characters together. Because the vice of snobbery in the novel is the thing that makes Blofeld vulnerable. It's the thing that James Bond can exploit to track his whereabouts. In chapter 7 of the novel, we learn that the solicitors of Blofeld had contacted the college earlier in connection with him wanting to establish a title to a family that he believes himself connected to by birth. And the underlying point of chapter 7 in the novel is to establish snobbery as Blofeld's Achilles heel. So if you look at chapter 7 in the novel, which is called The Airy Eel of Achilles, this is where Bond is talking to the bloke in the College of Arms called Sable Basilisk. And this bloke goes to Bond, "You think Blofeld's smart because you've seen the smart side of him," said Sable Basilisk, sapiently. "I've seen hundreds of smart people from the city, industry, politics, Famous people I've been quite frightened to meet when they walked into this room. But when it comes to snobbery, to buying respectability so to speak, whether it's the title they're going to choose or just a coat of arms to hang over their fireplaces in Surbiton, they dwindle and dwindle in front of you. So here you can see in the novel that Blofeld's interest in heraldry is related to the vice of snobbery, and this is the vice that James Bond uses in order to trap Blofeld. Now in the film they do have a brief line from M about snobbery, but it don't really make much sense because it comes right at the end, and they don't make any effort to relate it to the rest of the story.
They're going to buy Blofeld off. Now, sit down.
And the price?
Amnesty. A full pardon for all past crimes. Official recognition of his title when he retires into private life as Count de Bluchon. He seems to set great store by that. Very curious thing, snobbery.
But the thing is, this is 2 hours into the movie, right at the end. So retrospectively, it does allow the audience an explanation for why Blofeld is interested in heraldry. But it's so brief, it's like if you blink you'd miss it. Whereas in a novel, this theme receives a lot of attention, and it also comes at the start. So the reader of On Her Majesty's Secret Service understands all of this from the start of the novel. They understand Blofeld's motivation, and it allows them to make sense of the plot from the beginning. I think this also ties back to what we were saying earlier about Tracy, because I think the failure to emphasise her lack of snobbery shows that the screenwriters didn't really understand this theme in the novel at all. But let's move on to another weak point of the adaptation. The other thing that's missing from the film is irony, because irony is a big part of what makes the novel work, because the absurdity of the plot is actually made fun of in the novel, whereas in the film it's not at all. So in a novel where Bond tells M about his plans of how he's going to trap Blofeld, M says this, and this is at the start of chapter 8, "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" And then if you look over the page, it goes, M really swore, and when he did it was nearly always at stupidity. M obviously regarded Bond's plan as stupid. And then later on, this character called Mary Goodnight, she's a character that's not in the film at all, she says to Bond, "And all these stupid books about heraldry, it's just not you." So the thing is, there's a type of ironical distance in the novel between the absurd elements of the plot and the narrator signalling the strangeness of these events. Whereas in the film they're just strange events, without any mediating presence of a skillful narrator. And then again, the plot is also made fun of at the start of chapter 9. Look at this. The next day at London Airport, James Bond, bowler hat, rolled umbrella, neatly folded times and all, felt faintly ridiculous. So this is how he feels about his disguise in the novel. Whereas in the film, his disguise is much more elaborate, and George Lazenby never shows any form of discomfort at all. I think they could have included this in the film. They could, for example, have had a scene with Bond complaining to M and Q about feeling ridiculous in his get-up, and then they could have shook their heads and laughed or something. Or they could have had Bond looking in the mirror and sort of tutting. And in the novel, Bond also don't put on a silly voice. So it's also odd in the film how they lean so heavily into Bond's disguise, because in doing so they cause two problems. First of all, Bond looks like a twit, and he sounds like a twit, but it also adds to the camp tone that we've seen elsewhere. and it creates this uncomfortable sense that you're not really watching a Bond film, but more of a Bond parody. In terms of all the behind the scenes stuff, there's not quite so much to say this time. I think the only thing to mention really is the fact that they did lots of filming from helicopters. They also had a professional skier who doubled as a cameraman, and this is partly why the ski chase in the film really stands out. It's the reason why it's so believable. This bloke was able to ski backwards and film at the same time. I guess I should also mention about the avalanche as well, because they deliberately set off explosions to cause an avalanche that they then filmed. So have a look at this.
I set out with a small crew and we went to this uninhabited pass, and we had a helicopter dropping bombs on the high mountains all around us. And we dropped these 3 bombs, and what happened was unbelievable. Well, it's in the film, you see it in the film, but it was like a huge avalanche. It stretched 2 miles wide.
I wouldn't normally do this, but I think I want to say something about the critical reception of the film. Because the strange thing is, the reviews at the time were very negative, and they are also very critical of Lazenby's acting. I think the negative reviews at the time are also reinforced by the box office figures, which compared very negatively to the previous film, You Only Live Twice. But then more recent reviews have been much more positive. The film has even been ranked as one of the best Bonds by some critics, and this seems completely mad to me. Now, I can't talk about everything that's been written about this film, because there's a lot of it, but I've read a lot of the positive reviews, and as far as I can tell, there are 3 main reasons why people like this film. So number 1, they regard it as a faithful adaptation of the novel, and as we saw in the previous section, I don't think this is actually as true as people like to think. The second thing that people like is the fact that this is a more realistic Bond film. It's more about character and less about gadgets and stunts. Now, in general, I like this idea too, but the thing is, I think it's been done better in earlier films, and I'd say From Russia with Love is a great example. But the third reason people like this film has to do with the sad ending, because I think there's this general misconception that a sad ending is more profound than an happy ending. But as Ting Tong will tell you, I always enjoy an happy ending. I think some people have this idea that liking a sad ending marks you out as a more sophisticated connoisseur. It's almost as if a sad ending is seen as more artistic. But in general, most of these films do have happy endings, and this is part of the Bond formula, and I don't even see this as a negative. Because for me, part of the interest in watching these films comes from understanding the creative choices that are made within the confines of this formula. But my main point of disagreement with these people who like On Her Majesty's Secret Service is that it requires you to ignore or downplay or pretend not to notice all the things that are wrong with this film. And as we've seen over the course of this review, there's quite a lot of them. I think I'll start by saying that On Her Maj suffers from 3 main problems. So first of all, you got your poor direction, and this results in quite a few scenes where Lazenby breaks from the Bond character. Now, we went through quite a lot of these examples, but the 2 worst offences are probably Bond looking at a playboy and also looking like he's scared to death when he's being chased by Blofeld. But I think you can also put the excessive number of costume changes and some of the flamboyant costumes under this category too, because the director also puts James Bond in the wrong sort of clothes. And in addition to that, James Bond is also in disguise for so long, and he even puts on a silly voice, which adds insult to injury. But then the worst aspect of the poor direction has to do with the tone, which is not only camp, but also inconsistent, which in the end undermines the seriousness of the romance theme. And all of this seems like a complete disaster to me, and it creates the impression that On Her Madge is more like a Bond parody than a Bond film. But then I also think you've got a very weak screenplay that's based on a misunderstanding of the novel. And for me, this is the second major problem. This leads to a complete absence of irony and also a mistreatment of the snobbery theme. You also got a problem with a Bond girl. They attempt to go deeper this time into character. But the thing is, they turn Tracy into a fundamentally unlikable character, which, as we discussed earlier, is based on a misunderstanding of her character in the novel. So the two main problems we identified so far are the poor direction and the incompetent screenplay. But the third major problem has to do with the central performance of George Lazenby. And a combination of all of these things results in one of the worst James Bond films ever made. Despite all these criticisms, I can see why this novel would have been one of the hardest Fleming novels to adapt well, because it's such a weird and eccentric story. I think Roald Dahl could have managed it, given how brilliant his work with You Only Live Twice was. In fact, it's quite surprising that the producers didn't offer him more work. But I don't know, maybe he was busy. So there we go, 3 out of 10. To be honest with you, I even thought about going a bit lower. But in the interest of being fair and impartial, I think I should also mention that there are some positives. So this is the first James Bond film with a ski chase, and it's pretty great actually. Lazenby also does a fine job in the action scenes, and this is why the film also has some pretty decent fights. And I think I also have to acknowledge that there is at least an attempt to go deeper into character this time around, although the attempt don't really pay off. There's also an attempt to make a more realistic Bond film by dropping the gadgets and having fewer stunts, but as I said before, I think they did this better earlier on. But in general, I really hate this film, and I'm sure that's pretty clear by now. But I want to close by pointing out that this ain't even the worst James Bond film, and that is the most shocking thing of all. Anyway, that's 6 down and 19 to go, and Barry Butters signing out. Enjoy the rest of your day.